thank you very much for that very nice introduction. It's a little different from my last one. I was at a conference speaking, and he was introducing me. And after a long introduction, he said, and now I want to introduce Don Burns. And I think he wanted to say that unsung hero. Instead, it came out, and now I want to introduce Don Burns, that unhung zero. So thank you very much for that introduction. I actually turned to him and said, "How do you know?" I'm here to talk about a more serious topic, homelessness. This has become one of this country's biggest social problems. Since roughly 1980, when homelessness reemerged on the national scene, we have accomplished very little in, quote, ending homelessness. That's with billions and billions of dollars, countless hours of staff and volunteer time. We have done precious little to end this national tragedy. In fact, a recent report said at the current rate of decline, it will take 88 years to end homelessness. That's frankly not acceptable. So, when I talk about homelessness, what do I mean? When I use the term homeless, what do we all think about? Probably it's the guy standing at the red light with a sign, panhandling, or the guy sacked out on the sidewalk or in some doorway. And unfortunately, these folks reinforce all of our negative stereotypes. The fact of the matter is that the vast majority of people experiencing homelessness are not like these folks. Something like 15 to 20% of the total population of people experiencing homelessness are like the guy holding the sign or the guy asleep on the sidewalk. The vast majority of people, 80 to 85%, are mothers with children, sleeping in cars. They are youth who have been exiled by their parents. They are veterans with PTSD, or they are people with severe mental illness who are too afraid to be seen. So somehow we've got to eliminate those stereotypes. Now, you can ask, so what causes homelessness? Most of us, when we think about this, assume that the basic reasons are alcohol addiction, alcoholism, drug addiction, and bad decisions. Now, I want all of us to think about that because I can assure you that there are many more folks who are housed who have alcoholism, who have drug addiction. And who among us has never made a bad decision? I know I have. My most recent one was starting my talk this way. And what's the difference between housed and people experiencing homelessness? Housed people have a home. Homeless people do not. And also resources of various kinds. I hate to confess this, but I'm a policy geek. And so I like numbers. So I'm going to throw a few at you. Nationally, if you include all of the households that are either in extreme poverty or experiencing homelessness, we have a national deficit of 7.5 million units of housing. It would take every state would have to create overnight 150,000 units on average to eliminate that deficit. 150,000 units. Another way of saying it is for every 100 households in either extreme poverty or experiencing homelessness, for every 100 households, there are 17 available units that are attainable. Or, in other words, for every 6 households, there's 1 unit. That ratio, frankly, is simply unacceptable. It's not just housing that is in short supply. For the top 20% of those folks who are housing consumers, and by housing consumers I mean people who either rent or own their own homes. For the top 20%, their average annual income is $153,300, and they spend 19% of that income on housing. For the bottom 20%, their average annual income is $10,100, and they spend 87% on housing. That leaves them roughly $1,000 a year for everything else. Food, clothing, health care, child care, transportation, etc., etc., etc. And I would challenge all of us to live on $1,000 a year. Unacceptable. And to make matters worse, federal housing subsidies amount to approximately $250 billion a year. And the people who need it the most, low-income renters, get 20% of that. The others, high-income homeowners, get 80% of that through things like the mortgage interest deduction. Again, that's unacceptable. It's bad social policy, and frankly, it's bad economic policy. So, given all of this, what are we going to do? How do we move forward? How do we move the needle? Well, let me suggest some things. First of all, we need lots more legislation to improve the availability of resources, both housing and service resources. Secondly, we need litigation that will challenge lots of local statutes that essentially criminalize homelessness. Third, we need to think outside the box about ways to incentivize the private sector to do more to address this problem. Fourth, we need good evaluation that will help us identify exactly which programs are most effective in providing the kinds of housing and services for each subpopulation. And here is my vision. We have to come up with a strategy for changing public attitudes. I mentioned the stereotypes early on. A lot of us have those stereotypes. We have to change public attitudes and eliminate those stereotypes. And there's some ways to do that. First of all, we can use people-first language. And by that, I mean people experiencing homelessness, not homeless people. If we do that, what it means is we are discussing a condition rather than ascribing a personal trait. Secondly, we need to go about developing compelling stories about women and children, about youth. We need to get those stories out into the public to counteract the stereotypes. Third, we need a massive public outreach, public relations campaign across the country, not unlike Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Just think about the kind of impact that that campaign had. We need to develop something like that for the issue of homelessness. My dream, my vision, is to have a national network of organizations that are dedicated to creating public dialogues, developing advocacy, working hard to change public attitudes. At our Burns Center, we have a program called Neighbors Overcoming Poverty and Homelessness. And that's their specific charge, is to develop public dialogues, to work to change public attitudes. We've got to do this. That's the most important thing we can do. In conclusion, it's clear we have to move the needle, and we have to move it very aggressively. I've identified some things that we can do, but most importantly, we have to change public attitudes. If we don't, we are consigning the most vulnerable, the most at-risk friends and neighbors of all of us to the dustbin of history. As a start, let me suggest the following. Remember, one person experiencing homelessness is one person too many. Thank you.